So welcome to the Belgian Scale Modelers Convention 2019. My name is Kelvin. I hope you have a lovely morning. So thank you for taking the time to come here and watch this demonstration. So what I'm going to do today, how many of you guys here are here for the first time this morning? First time? Okay, so what I'm going to do, if you guys have attended yesterday's demonstration, you probably find this as a bit of a repeat, but I'm just for the benefit of those who have just joined us this morning, I'm going to just basically just take the first 10 minutes and talk a bit about how I work, or rather my workspace. So basically this workspace I have here, what I have is a wet palette here, as you can see on top here. This is actually wax paper. Right, it's different from baking paper because this wax paper doesn't go into the oven. It has a thicker coating of wax, or rather it has a coating of wax. It's still paper, but it's a coating of wax. The difference is that this is much stronger than baking paper. So beneath this I have is a napkin. The purpose of the napkin is to prevent the edges of the wax paper from curling as I paint. Right, and beneath it is just a regular sponge. All right. Today I'm going to use the Waffen-SS Camouflage set from Vallejo. All right, Vallejo. All right, from Vallejo. So this one, this set is formulated by Jean Maltis. It's pretty good, if you ask me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start first by introducing the subject matter we're going to use on. This is a Young Miniatures bust. It's a 1/10 scale bust. What I'm going to do today, I'm going to show you how to, in terms of how I'm going to paint the oak leaf camouflage on this smock here. Right? You'll see in terms of how I go about handling the paint and how I'm going to render the patterns on this. So if, right? So just in it also, what I do is generally what I have here is a piece of black paper. I use that to test my paints. Right. So this is something that I'll have to talk about before I begin. Now, on this bust, you've noticed what I've done some preparation work. What I did was that I sprayed it with flat black, and after that I used an airbrush, previously before it was spray can, and I sort of like from the top misted white from the top down to represent a light fall. This provides a basic idea of how the light is going to fall on the model itself, right? And at the same time, it also establishes the areas, like the zones, for both highlights and shadows. So for those who have no idea in terms of where to place the shadows, where to place the highlights, using this step will allow you to sort of get an idea, the basic, very basic idea of where the highlights and shadows are going to be, all right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you in terms of the type of brushes I generally use. This brush here is a Filbert Brush. It's a flat brush. I use it for painting large surface areas. So large surface areas meaning like, for example, if I were to paint a helmet, if I want to render tones on the helmet, I'll use the Filbert Brush. So the thing is that this particular brush, right, if you notice at the top here, if you look at the design of it, you notice that it's actually curved at the top here. All right, so this allows me to actually get a much softer stroke as compared to the chiseled brush. So the chiseled brush is the one that has the 90-degree angle there, looks like a palette. This one is different, this is curved. And in both of them are flat brushes, okay? So those of you guys who have not worked with acrylics before, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover a very important point in terms of how I handle the brush. So the brush handling is very important before we talk about painting the camouflage, right? Reason why I'm talking about this is because most of the time when you read any step-by-step articles, right, they don't cover this part. All right, so a lot of the work, the groundwork, happens outside of the figure. So what I do now, you can see how I'm agitating the paint. I'm actually tapping it on the palm, the back of my palm here, the wrist there. This is to agitate the pigments so that it will combine well with the binder. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and just squeeze a bit of the white out. So the very important things, like let's say if you are not familiar with figure painting, all right, if you're not familiar with figure painting, you've never done this before, right? Especially in terms of brush painting, what you need to notice, what you need to constantly observe are two things: the opacity of the paint, that means how much coverage the paint can achieve, how much of paint can cover. the opacity. And the second is the flow, which means how much paint gets discharged from the brush. These are the two things that have to be in in harmony before you can before you can apply the paint onto the surface. So normally for most beginners, when they just take the paint, take the paint up like this, it's very thick, and what they do is that they sort of like slap the paint onto the surface, and if you notice, right, you can see it forms blobs, right? So that's the number one mistake, right? So what needs to be done is basically, right, when you take the paint out, what you need to do is you need to sort of unload it. I'm going to use a napkin, unload it first, and then from there, test it out on the paper, and then you sort of like spread it, and you see how it goes, right? Now, when you sort of like, when you get a broken line like this over here, it just means one thing: the paint is too thick. So we add some water, right, to the paint, right, and if we do that without unloading, okay, this is without unloading, you notice that you pull up, you get water droplets happening. That's where you got your tide or watermarks happening. So what we need to do after we've thinned the paint down, we want it to flow better, all right? We drain out the excess, and then we pull it down like this. You can see it gets a much weaker line. It flows better, but it gets a much weaker line. Now, I want you to observe something very interesting here. All right, if I were to drop my brush down like this, and I were to pull, and I were to lift, you'll notice something very interesting happening. When you look at the ends here, there is a collection of paint. Right? That's where tide marks also happen. So we want to always observe, we always want to prevent this from happening. So there is a method to applying paint on the surface. All right? The method is basically, okay, so I'm going to just mix the paint now. Get a bit more opacity. All right? Load, unload. All right? And then I'm going to like land this. You see, so instead of going down and pull, like an angle down and pull, I'm going to just like land it down like this and lift it up. All right? So this is very thick. So I'm going to show you down and land. You can see there's a difference in terms of the ends here. You can see that? It is softer. All right? You can see from here it's actually much softer. That's the result you're going to get. So you're going like this. Right? That's the brush stroke. The paint here is a bit dry. All right? So if you land it down and you pull it up, that's what it is. So it's about, if you find it's too dry, add a bit more water. Unload, and then pull and lift it up. And you can see the effects, right? It's much softer. This is a lot of implication because it deals with the transition of tones, tonal transitions. All right, so the handling of the brush and the paint is the first key step to hand brushing. So we load, unload, and then I'm going to pull a long line down. I'm going to land this line down like this, and I'm going to pull it up slightly up there. And you can see there's no tailing off, there's no gathering of the paint here. So the spread, you can see, is very, very even. So this is important because, right, this is how you are going to, if you're going to get highlights, you're going to paint on the highlights. This is the stroke that I'm going to apply to attain the highlights. It is not dropping it down like this and then dragging it across and then lifting up. And you can see that's where the problem comes up. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to sort of dilute the paint a bit more. All right, so I'm going to add a bit more white to a bit more water to the white. Load, unload, and then sort of, pull the stroke down again, down and up. And you notice something is that when I work very slowly, you find that the brush, right, there's more control with the brush. So we don't work fast. When you work fast and you keep going up and down, you realize, right, you get a bit of a dry brush effect. That's not what we want. It gets very messy. You get a lot of brush strokes. The main thing to look out for is actually the control, right? To have the control. So you have to exercise restraint, right? So again, I want you to focus on this part. So this is the first part we drop. This is the second layer. Land and lift. All right? This is second layer. Third layer, land and lift. Now we are not really adding more paint to this. It's still the same load of paint on the brush. So we just take this, you can see, all right, this part here. So now we land again and lift, right? So maybe just take a bit more, it's a bit dry. And you notice something's happening, all right? I'm getting a gradient. And this gradient is achieved not by different colors, but achieved by the different opacity of the paint. That is it's like watercolors. Okay? So this is the third layer, so wait for it to dry a bit. Okay? And you can see as I go slow, right? If I work slow, you can see that there's more control. Right? So you can see from here, you can see that there's a gradient from going from the gray all the way to the white. So that is basically, right, this is the key feature, this is the strokes that I will employ when I'm going to do the highlights later for some of the areas. So this is different from blending. So a lot of people ask me what's the difference between feathering and blending. Very simple. Blending, let's put a good example. Let's look at toast, butter and toast. Feathering is that on the toast, on the piece of toast, one end you have a fat layer of butter. And feathering means basically taking the knife, and from that fat layer you spread that thick layer of butter across the surface. And as it reaches to the end, right, you get a very thin layer, a very soft layer of butter. That's feathering. You create a very soft effect. So what I'm doing technically, right, you can see it's a bit like it's feathering. Now blending is when you have butter and you have jam, and it forms a boundary. And when you blend, basically you take the butter knife, you take the knife and you go to the center and you just move it around such that the butter and the jam sort of combines together. So when two colors combine together, you blend. That's what it means by blending. So blending, if it's done well, you yield the right result. If it's not done well, you get a lot of mess. There's a kitchen appliance called a blender. You put in your yogurt and your banana and you just press it, you blitz it, it blends. Two compounds come together and get mixed. That's what I mean by blending. So when blending happens, mixing happens. Now there's a problem with mixing, is when you mix anything, right? Let's say with red and with green, two complementaries, we mix them together. Both will cancel off each other and then you get brown. You lose saturation when you mix. So, which means, right, you take something, it's like you take cocoa powder and water, you mix together, you get basically hot chocolate. So, each of them will lose their properties. So, especially if you're looking at your models, how come when my mid-tones, right, they appear gray? It's very simple. Your shadows will start to blend with the highlights, and that's where you get gray. And why you are losing the saturation is because when you have, let's say, olive drab, say I want to highlight my olive drab, I use white as a highlight, and then let's say if I use white and olive drab, if I blend together, you get a pastel color. It's very weak. It's very gray. So that's the one big problem about blending. All right? So feathering is actually a more optimum way of working, more efficient, because with feathering, you still preserve the intensity of the color. Right? That is what I prefer. So as you can see right now, you can observe from here. All right. So this part here, you're going to focus attention down here. So I'm going to just continue another two more strokes here to just build up the opacity. One. Okay. Two. All right. And then perhaps three here. All right. And four. All right. So as you can see right now, what I have here, if you can see that this stroke, you can see as I start to apply more layers, I'm actually gradually building up the opacity of the color. And what you have, you can see the saturation of the white appearing. So in this instance, let's say I want to paint, let's say an object in green. All right, so I'll take a bit of deep green here as part of the demonstration. All right, dilute it. Okay, so on this, dilute it maybe just about 20% water so that it flows well, and it's also not that opaque, so you can see the opacity is actually very light. And on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm just going to paint it over. You notice just with one stroke you can get a gradient. And what you have here is that you do not lose saturation. If anything, right, the actual green actually comes out better. The green will appear like the green that you want. So this is the basic idea that we are going to follow when it comes to painting, rendering camouflage patterns and rendering single color objects. All right? So it's very simple to understand. So of course, white is just only a basic idea. If you want to swap it out with perhaps even like Naples yellow, ice yellow, you can still also yield the same effect as well. So the undercoat doesn't necessarily need to be white all the time. White gives you a much, a much cooler appearance. Right? So this is the first layer. If I want to actually get more, I can actually apply another layer again. You can see the green gets more, much more intense. Right? So essentially what we are doing is dealing with a lot of filters. We are dealing a lot of filters, or rather a lot of layers in terms of filters. So this is one filter, second filter, and then you can see this is the third filter. Right? And you can see the opacity building up. So that's the idea that we are working here. So if you want to make your colors look bright, start with a bright undercoat. And this is the basic idea that we are doing in terms of this particular figure here. Right? So now, okay, so you guys at least have an idea of how I handle my paint. So it's the same thing as actually working with the liner brush. These are your round brushes, right? Round brushes. So the round brushes I'm using, this is one from Russia. This is a Kolinsky Stables from Russia, Nevskaya Palitra. Currently I'm switched to this most of the time. I still use the Winsor & Newton CV7s once in a time, but most of the general painting I'll use this, principally because this is much cheaper. And also, if you observe carefully enough, you will notice that this particular brush is particularly much longer. Right? How many of you guys have actually used this type of brushes before and find it's very inconvenient to use? No, haven't? All right. So anyway, let me explain the differences between these two brushes first. Between this and the Series 7, I like to call the Palitra the T34s of brushes because they are cheap, they are easy, they're cheap, and they are actually very good. All right. It's probably about €3 for this one. I bought it for $4 Singapore, so it's about €2. I think give and take the transaction. This is 4 times the price. This is like your Panther tank versus your T34. So now, the thing I want you to observe a bit about this is a 00 brush, and this is a 0. So don't let the zeros affect you. The main thing is that what you want to look out for in terms of brushes is look at the tip. Right? You want you to look at the tip here. Like that's the most important thing, the tips. The tip definitely tells you how fine how fine a line you can pull. Another thing to look out for is also the length and the thickness of the brushes, the bristles there. So for this particular brush, basically why I prefer this is very simple because it has the bristles are much longer. It can draw more paint. Right, compared to the Series 7. Now, those of you, if you are working with oils and enamels, right, you'll find that this type of brushes, right, are particularly unsuited, because the bristles are long. You find that this part here tends to be more flexible, and because it's more flexible, it's more difficult to sort of push the paint. So for this type of brushes, this part of brushes discharges paint better. But if your method of working with oils especially, and if you push the paint most of the time, especially with oils, if you're into pushing paint, then the Series 7 will be much better. Because the Series 7 has a much shorter bristle and a fatter body. So which means, right, if you're using if you're going to let's say you use raw umber, you take a bit of Persian, take a bit of raw umber from this, work it into the shadow, and then sort of like you want to use it to spread out, like do a feathering. Series 7s are better. Palitras, you're looking at these kind of long brushes like Escodas and the Nevskaya Palitra. They are not very good for this because the stems, the body itself is actually more flexible, it's much weaker. Now, the thing is that I'm not working with oils, I'm not working with enamels, I'm working with acrylics. So generally for acrylics, right, these are much better because they can pull a much longer line. Okay, so I'm going to introduce a couple of mediums as well. Another medium is actually called a flow enhancer. Okay, I use this flow enhancer basically as in the name. This one is transferred to a different container, but Vallejo, they do sell the Airbrush flow enhancer. That works just as well for hand painting. So in case you do not know what the medium is, basically it's just for you to add into the paint so that when you spray, the paint comes out much smoother. So what I do sometimes, if I want to pull long lines, get long lines, right, I will actually mix a bit of the flow enhancer into the paint, and it allows me to sort of, do a bit of like outlining of the shadows, right? So some of you guys here, if you want, how many of you guys have worked with acrylics? So if you just put your finger out, I'm just let you try, just a finger, and you sort of like rub it in between your fingers. You realize it's very soapy. So it does not affect the consistency of the paint whatsoever. So it's not like the retarder medium, where sometimes it dries a bit gloss, a bit starchy. But for this, right, when it dries, evaporates, right, you don't see any residue. And it makes the paint slippery. So because it makes the paint slippery means, right, it is particularly good for drawing lines. So if you want to accentuate like shadows, seams, even maybe to a certain extent, you want to sort of like outline the rivets, you can actually incorporate a bit of this into the paint and paint it, right? So now I'm going to, once with this out of the way, I'm going to show you how I'm going to approach the painting of the oak leaf camouflage here. So now the thing about camouflage, painting camouflage, there are a lot of methods. This is my method. There's no right, there's no wrong. You just have to choose what you're comfortable with. That's all, right? I have my own philosophy, or rather, I have my own methods based on my experiences with painting. So, for most people, what I understand, for some others, right, not that it's a poor method, but for some others, right, before they start, they will sort of determine that this is the base coat of this particular camouflage. So, let's say, perhaps it's maybe like saddle brown. Okay, I'm going to use saddle brown for the base coat. So I will cover everything up with saddle brown. I tone it, pre-tone it, right? And after that, I will paint the patterns, right? Like the green, the dark greens and the green over that. Now, for me, I don't recommend that because, right, what you're doing, you're stacking. You are stacking layers. So if you have the base coat here, and if you have like, if you paint over it, chances are with acrylics, right, they're very thick. You're going to stack another layer over, and at certain angles, right, you will see there's a blob on the surface. So you want to avoid that at all costs. So my recommendation, normally when I start to paint, right, I'll try to get them on the same layer, which means the base color as well as the pattern to be on the same layer. So how am I going to do this? Very simple. I'm going to start first, right, by not pre-toning. I'm going to work not with the base color, but rather I'm going to start first with the green shapes. So perhaps we're going to just isolate this particular sleeve here. And maybe we'll just find a pattern, maybe around about here. So you can see I've got the pattern out. I've traced this, I've already gotten this pattern out by actually, in Photoshop, by tracing over a piece of Zelban, oak leaf Zelban. And after that, sort of shrink it down to the exact size of the scale that I want, scale it down to the scale that I want, and sort of create a template for this, right? So what I'm going to do first, okay, for now, basically, okay, maybe I will just do this part here. Okay, we'll try to map this portion here onto the sleeve, right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to first start with getting used to the black SS. Should be the green, the black green. Okay, and I'm going to use a bit of perhaps deep green. Okay. Right, just put a bit of deep green here. Just place me a bit of deep green here. And going to use a bit of olive green right about here. Okay. Right. Then for the base color, I'm going to use about 2 colors here. I think a good color would be saddle brown. I'll probably use the saddle brown and put it on the other side here. Okay. And a bit of the orange brown, perhaps for the highlights. And yeah, I think this is good enough for now. Okay, I'm going to put in maybe the camel black brown. This is good for the shadows, so I'm probably going to place it somewhere about here. Okay. All right. So I think you guys can have a good view here. So as a precaution, right, I don't really trust Vallejo paint, so I'm going to take a bit of flat base. This solution contains flat base with a bit of water. So oops. So I'm just going to dab a bit. My experience is that the browns usually sometimes All right, if you're not careful, the browns will have dries to a bit of a semi-gloss with some of the Vallejo paints. I mean the browns especially. Okay, so bear with me here for a while. Okay, so the bit of the green here, this is the black green. Okay, this is the deep green. This is olive green. I may use a bit of sunny skin tone later, so it depends on the situation if it calls for that. Okay, or maybe I can just use this, what do you call that, orange brown for that matter, right? Okay, this is the saddle brown here. Okay, we are good now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to commence on the painting. So what I'm going to do now, I'm probably going to sort of like target this particular area right about here. Right, oops. Okay, so because given the size, given the whole entire surface area you're dealing with, I'm going to use a flat filbert. This is a 0 flat filbert. All right, I'm going to start off with the dark green first. All right, so we're going to start off with the dark green. And probably going to sort of like, we're going to trace up this particular portion here first. So I'm going to do is I'm going to block it. So I think we can see. Let me move this a bit to the side here. So take a bit of paint, test it out, unload it. Okay, and yep. So just basically just get a base, just get the shape out here, So I'm not going to trace. I'm not going to just like. I'm just going to just get a rough shape at this moment. Right, so I'm just going to paint it across just as a wash. You can see it's actually very thin. You can see that my layer of colors, as you can see on here, it's very thin. So the reason why I add more water is such that I have more control over this. Okay. So I'm just going to get this whole entire shape right about here, and maybe some of the brown parts here, I can use it later. Okay, wait for that to dry. Right, now I can use a bit of the brown, that about here, dark brown. And I'm going to just sort of like use this and I'm going to get get a mid-tone here between this the black brown and the saddle brown for the base color. Right, I think the saddle brown is good enough because it's a bit of a reddish tone, the pinkish tone of the oak leaf pattern. So I'm going to just dilute this. Going to unload this and then check again, make sure that it's not too thick. The main thing is that you want it to flow, and this is a bit too watery, so I'm going to drain it out. Can see that? All right, such that when you sort of pull a line, you get an even line like this. This is what you want to do, right? And this way, right, you don't get an unnecessary buildup of paint, right? So, and it also yields you a much softer effect. So I can just like test it out like this, just paint it out like this, and just paint it over. And you can see something peculiar happening. You can see that the black, right, because we don't have a full opacity. You'll notice that the black still shows through. And as the brown goes through the black, as the brown goes over the black rather, you'll see that the black gets lighter. Right? The black gets lighter. So that's what you can see. This is how I work. See, and it's very thin. Main ball thing is very thin. We do not want, as I said, an over build up of paint. So a lot of control. All right. And now I can move on more into the saddle brown here. In this case here, maybe I just want it to be a bit lighter. Add a bit of the orange brown. Right about here. And let's test it out a bit. Okay, maybe I'll just add a bit of orange. Orange is good. Maybe just make it a bit warmer. Yep. Okay, just to warm it up a bit. That'll be nicer. Yep. Okay, nice. So we have a nice tone there. Load, unload, and then we'll just have to test it out. Okay, so I'm going to just apply on the highlights. Where to apply? You just look at the parts that where it catches the light here. You just sort of just like go over with one stroke. bit of water here. It's not flowing as smooth as I hope. So you can see what I do is that once the area is covered, I don't revisit the area until it's dry. Okay, the last thing you want to do is that while it's still wet, you start to go over it again, and that's where you get all these sort of marks here. So when that happens, right, you find that the surface gets very messy. So the main thing is that once you go over it, okay, you go slow, you go over it, and just leave it as it is. Now, if it's messy like this, never mind, just let it dry and go over. Then after that, you can patch this up later on the second run. Okay, so now back to this. Okay, maybe I'll add a bit of black. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to use the number 2 brush right about here. Okay, with the black, mix it with the black green. Okay. So this one is, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the, I'm going to sort of add a bit of the flow enhancer here, just one drop to the whole entire lot of the black green here. All right, so I'm going to use this, and I'm going to start to sort of like draw the outer patterns now. So I'm going to go for more. I'm going to go for more definition. Okay, so down here, and you can see right now, all right. I'm just working like clouds, as you know, just like round patterns and clouds. Just the sides down there. Okay, right, you can see this is the second round I'm doing. As you can see, how I'm stacking is that I have the green, the brown, the green, and then later on, brown again. And the stack, right, what I'm looking at, I'll be using different colors as I stack along. So what you have is you have an interlacing of colors like this. So at the end of the day, when two layers meet, they'll meet on the same level. That's the idea. And the whole the surface will be uniform. So you do not want to have one layer and then stack over another layer like this. And then what you have a blob. We want to avoid that. So this is especially so as this is important because if you're painting the P pattern camouflage, that is going to show up. Right? So that's going to avoid that as much as possible. So sometimes for the P pattern camouflage, instead of placing a dot, sometimes I place a dot, I will sort of like draw around the dot as well so that we can level the surface. And that's why if you look at my P patterns, right, they are quite flat as a result. Okay? So it's a lot of what you call surfacing work to be done, just like mending potholes on the road. Okay? So, yep. Okay, so now we have this. Let's continue with this. Add a bit of black. I think we can strengthen the shadows here. All right, so I'm going to strengthen up the shadows right about here. Okay. Right. And maybe from here to the front there, I can still sort of, now I'm going to maybe perhaps use a lighter color to get the highlight there. So you can see this is the brown here. All right, it's already dried, so I can just like brush it over. Now you can see because of the white undercoat, the colors look much brighter. I'm going to use a bit of black brown down here, and I'm going to sort of like use it and fill in. Okay, so you can see if you're working wet on wet, this is wet on wet. So when this is when blending is happening, and even for blending, right, I'll try to use the same colors to sort of blend. So just push it in. And the trick is, if you notice, right, I'm not using the round brushes for this purpose. I'm actually using the Filbert brush. And the Filbert brush is actually good for blending. So if you are accustomed to all painting, This brush, right, can help you to spread the paint much easier. All right. So this is another layer. This is much thicker, and we just take this and going over once. That's all. The trick is to go over once. Try not to revisit try not to revisit the place right when it is still wet. Okay, that's my advice. All right. You can always, because if you're working very thin, you can always stack on another layer until you get the right opacity. Okay. So you can see right now the edges there. If I want to, I can go in there. All right, and sort of get the sides there now. So one of the reasons why I work with the dark green first is because this will give us a very good base for us to place the light green. Okay, the light green parts. So as you can see, it takes me a bit of time to build up to the level of opacity. Okay, so right, so it's about here. Maybe I'll just take a bit more, and then maybe I'll just get a bit of the pattern right about here. Right, so we stack this up. You can see the paint is actually very watery. Okay, we have one over here like this, and maybe we have one somewhere around about here. Maybe a dot here, here, and here. Right, so we have sort of like, and maybe let's place another one. And here, okay. Right, so generally I think we have a basic idea of how this looks. And then next, I'm going to go over the brown. And I can sort of use this, right? I can actually use the brown to sort of like trim. Sometimes I do that to sort of like to trim. So you can see right now as I sort of add on the layers. Okay, so we got the two boundaries out. We got a bit of a shadow going on already. I've not placed in the highlights yet, right? So next I'm going to do is going to work with the green now. So I'm going to do the mid-tone of the green. I'm going to take a bit of the deep green, and I'm going to add a bit of the saddle brown here. Because basically, if you look at this green is actually too saturated. So I'm going to sort of desaturate this green by adding a bit of orange to this green and make it a bit more like olive color. All right. Yep. Okay, so a bit of water here. Right, so now we are going to the next part. We're going to get the mid-tone of the green out. Now, if you want to get more variations out, you can basically, right at this stage, I'm going to sort of maybe just follow some of the patterns there. Right, maybe place a bit of a dot here. Okay, can go lighter a bit. I think we can go a bit lighter. So, take it thin. Right, and just dab the color on. So now with the green, what I'm doing with the green here is I'm just looking at the parts, right, the highlights. So I'm just only going to just use this green and just work on the highlights. I'm not focusing on getting the pattern out at the moment. Just get some highlights out. See how the contour looks like. And just dab it. You can see right now we are lightening the dark green here. And you can see the effects are actually very, very soft. While the rest of the other pattern is actually, the rest of the shapes are actually drying out. You can just place it up like this. Okay, so maybe what I can do is I can just pass this around. You guys can have a look. All right. in terms of how I work, in terms of how I stack the colors, right? You can see the completed result at the other side. Great, on the other side there, you can see how the pattern works, right? So this, the initial stages, right, basically is all about making sure that the spread of paint is even, making sure that it's homogeneous, the surface is uniform. That's the most important thing, right? Don't be too impatient. The key thing is that don't be too impatient to try and draw the pattern out in one sitting. Try to gradually build it up. So especially for camouflage patterns, right, the last thing you want is to have the pattern appearing too defined and too artificial, like a Versace scarf, for example. If you look at the pattern, some of them actually, if you look at the boundaries of some of the prints, they're very soft. And that's what you want to preserve. So you can achieve that by actually increasing the transparency and applying it in layers. And that's how you can get that much softer look. Now, if you want a much more defined look, then you probably have to apply a thicker layer of color. Then when you do so, you have to be careful that it doesn't sort of like build up and it doesn't builds up too much. That's the thing. It doesn't overlap. Make sure that they are actually on the same level. Yep. Okay. So it's the same principle as we do if you're going to do the splinter camouflage. It's also about the same. It's also the same principle. So what I did here previously, also in a previous demonstration, is that I've used the same principle as well for the splinter camouflage. Started off with a dark brown. In the same fashion as for the oak leaf, I started off with a dark green. In this case, it started off with a dark brown, and then from there, I started to work in the greens and the base color. Working the base color. And then once the base colors are done, then I'll be working the greens. And what happens with the greens is that the greens are painted over the browns, as in this case. So if I were to sort of like repair this a bit. Okay. So painting camouflage, right, basically it's you need a lot of patience for this. So there's no shortcuts if you want to get the good results. So I'm just using this, I'm just mending this part here. So you can see when you have this sort of pre-toning happening already, when you see the pre-toning here, all right, it sort of gives you an idea of where to place the shadows and where to place the highlights. So when you sort of paint over, it's actually very easy to sort of like match which color goes where. Right, and the thing is that try to keep the colors thin. So anytime if you make a mistake, right, you can easily paint over without having an excessive buildup of paint. So I'm just going to work on the highlights now for this one here, just painting over. Okay, so if you guys want, you can have a look at this one as well, in terms of how I work with this. So. Well, it comes back. Okay, you can see it starts to dry up. Okay, as it dries, you can see the effect. It becomes much more muted. All right, and you can see if you look under the light, right, you can see the spread of the paint is actually very, very smooth. Right, the surface itself is very smooth. So that's the idea here. So once we have this, if you want to get some highlights, I'm going to just toy a bit. I'm going to get a bit of highlights here. Okay. A bit of the brown, a bit of the brown, a bit of a white. Okay, so if I want to sort of get the highlights now, I can sort of like use the, oops, this is the 0. Okay, yep. The 0, I will use the other brush. Because this is a large surface area, so I would switch to a much larger brush. I think another problem I've also observed with a lot of people is that they don't use the right brush for the right purpose. If you're dealing with a large surface, it's better to use a larger brush for a more even distribution of paint. Okay, so I'm just going to right now, I'm just going to focus on this part here, and I'm going to work on the highlights. And I'm also painting, notice something, the trick is I'm also painting around the pattern. See that? Again, as I said already, once you put this up, this was on top, so now I have another layer that goes on top of this that sorts of like help to level out. So you can see I'm putting the highlights here now. Again, you can see that how thin is the color. It's about this, is very thin, right? So don't worry about building opacity. Go over once, wait for it to dry, see what effects, see if the effect, see if you're happy with the effects. If not, then you just go over another layer. Remember, because if you work with very thin layer of colors, right, when you paint and when it dries, right, it will normally give you a very soft line. You can see that. Okay, so remember, if you add more water and you start to paint, all right, and when it dries, right, generally it gives you a very soft line. If the paint is too thick, and in this case the paint is very thick, and if you sort of lay it down, you can see it becomes very heavy. And that's where you start to get that blob. So again, everything is all about adding more water, right? It's all about adding water. See. So adding some water here and a bit of the orange. All right. So you can see now I'm going back to this again. All right. Waiting for it to dry and set. So I'm just I'm just looking at the highlights there and just painting on and just making sure that you can see the highlight. So I can just pass this around. You can see I'm touching up with the highlight. So I had the base color before. So basically, just to recap, we did the black and white, followed by the green, the dark green, and then the base color by the side. And then what I did was that I went to repair the dark green around the sides there. And then after that, and I added new spots onto the base color. And now I'm going in with the highlights for the base color. And the highlights of the base color is going to go on the same layer as the spots that went over the base color. So you can see it's like, one over here, another one, again, next level, next level, next level, next level. So everything is, again, as I said, flat on the same level, right? So you can see this is it's time consuming if you want to get the good results. So if you're after the good results, this is the easiest way to do it, right? Unfortunately. Right? So the main thing, as I said already, if you've seen how I work, the key thing is actually adding more. Key thing is actually adding water. The key thing is just water, right? So as you can see right now, I'm doing the paint. Sometimes if you want to get a point, right? If you draw the paint out, you want to get a point. Sometimes it's also good to turn the round brush so that you sort of like spin it a bit. Then you get a sharp tip, right? Okay, some water at the sides there. So we'll just let it wait for you guys to have a look. So sometimes I use the glove here just to basically just test my brush. A lot of people just paint on their hands, but I don't like that. So you can see, main thing is that with this brush, you can see in my hand, you can use this to sort of, if you're good control, you can get a pretty long line using this. All right. So long brushes, right? Basically, if you got a long brush, basically it's like you have a 100 round magazine. Okay, so as I said, this is actually very useful for, and it speeds up basically the painting process because you don't have to keep revisiting the reservoir of colors. So once you have all you need to do is also learn how to control the round brush. So perhaps maybe what I can do, talk a bit about round brush, is that most people when they paint, they always drop too much on the surface and they drag. Now, if you want to get fine details, for painting fine details, right? The way to deal with the way to get like details, right? To have more control is actually making sure that only 1 millimeter of the paint surface, right, touches this. 1 millimeter of the brush touches the surface. So if you want to get straight lines like this, right, it's basically just only letting the tip discharge. You can see that. You can see I can get actually a very fine line. And this is actually a 2, number 2. Why I'm gonna get a fine line is because I only let the tip touches the surface, and I can pull a very long line using this. See that? Da, da, da. So this is a matter of practice. Right, so you can see how I'm able to pull the lines. And as I said, the size of the brush doesn't matter. It's actually the tip. So this brushes, as I said, really, I like it for, you can see for a good reason why I quite like this. Okay. So later on, when you start to do the shadows and sort of outlining to define the features, right, you can see how I go about, okay, doing that. Okay. So as you can see, that's where the second stage there. As you can see, I'm actually putting the highlights to sort of, okay. So now, once it dries, you can see the effect. You can see there's the three-dimensional effect coming out. You can see this part is still very soft. That's because it's only in the first layer. So if I want to define the pattern further, so all these are still in the first layer. So I want to define the pattern better. I can just go in. So I hope you guys can see from here. Right. Okay, good. So I hope I don't obstruct you guys. So I can go over and start to draw around it. So if you guys, you can see I can start to define it. You can see the sides becoming much sharper. So now I can go in if I want to do the light olive part. This part is the brighter part here. The olive, I'm going to go with olive green now. Okay, so let's look at this. Very thin. And just painting over. So you can see right now, now I can start to go over with the green. Now, why I'm doing this now? While I'm doing this, you can observe that I'm only putting the pattern over the highlights. So don't be alarmed. You can see right now the olive looks very bright. Don't worry about it. Because we are working very thin, you always need to understand that it will always lighten up as it dries. Right? It will lighten up. So perhaps one over here. And perhaps over here as well. So I'm painting within, see the boundary there. And I'm just using as a see, this is the part where everything comes together, right? So you can see it right now, over there. This is the next step. So as you can see, now once the green goes over, everything starts to pull in. And as it dries, the effect becomes very soft. So if you want to sort of reinforce the effect, you just add another layer over until you're happy with it, that's it. And it's very forgiving because the paint is very thin. So the word here is to just work very thin. And you can see the effect will build up. Right, so by the time it dries and it goes over here, you can start to put in the highlights again. You can punch in the extreme highlights. And you can pull it all the way up, and then you can push it all the way down. So, okay, so maybe since we've got a bit more time on our hands, we'll do a bit of an experiment. Let's get a bit more playful here. Right, so I'm going to use this color. This is a very bright green. It's like livery green from Game Color. Right. So normally, for me, I don't really look at the colors. I don't look at the name of the colors. Okay. I look at the color by itself, what you can do. Okay. So I'm going to take a bit of the livery green here. And I'm maybe going to put a bit of brown, because I want to sort of cut this color here. I don't want it to be too bright. So I'm using this to sort of like get this shade here. And maybe I can add a bit of flat base just in case. I've always had bad experience with this color. Bad experience in a sense that it's always dry as gloss. Okay, a bit of olive, perhaps. Okay, yep, I think this is a nice color. Bit of a yellow, bit of a brownish tone there. Okay, I think this is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just experiment a bit. I'm going to show you something a bit extreme. So you can see the color here is very bright. It's very fresh. Okay, maybe I just put a drop of the flow enhancer. Since just a teeny weeny drop of flow enhancer, just to make it a bit more slippery so that it can flow a bit better, it spreads a bit more even. And I also realized that with the flow enhancer, when I add a flow enhancer, it reduces the occurrence of the tide marks. Right. So now we have this. So what I'm going to do is going to just pull this out a bit more. Have this and just maybe just some parts. So you can see it's very bright. So don't worry, I've not gone bonkers yet. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm going to sort of like pull out. I'm going to use this color to sort of pull out. So this is sort of like I'm going to show you how to sort of pull out the contrast and then throw it back down again. And then so from here you can sort of get like an equilibrium. Right. So right now we're waiting for this to dry. I can take a bit of this same color again and move over here. I want to reinforce and strengthen my highlights on the other side. Here. So here, put the highlight down about here. Painting around it. So if you want to know how I'm only looking at the parts where the highlights are, and again look at how thin the colors are. See that? So if you could try it, and if you see that the colors if they don't appear soft, you don't get a soft effect. Well, principally it's because the paint you're using is too thick. Should technically flow nicely like this. Okay, right about here. Now, yep, this part here is dried up already. So it looks, wow, it's too bright, it's too strong. I made a mistake. So what to do? Well, back to one, so we cut back to this. Okay, this color here, this is olive here. So you can see the difference. So I'm going to do is I'm going to take this olive. You can see that. So I think most of you guys can see what we did earlier on. So what we can do is just take this and you just like wash over with the green. Now you can see something happening to the green there. The green starts to sort of like, gets played down, but you get a richer green. Almost to a point of it looking luminous. Right, so you can see from here, it's pretty bright now, you can see that. So this is how I sort of like, bring it up, the colors, and then bring it back down again. So the things that sometimes, right, if you want to mix that exact shade of color, in order to get the coverage, you have to apply a very thick layer of the paint. So what I did was I did a shortcut. I used a very thin layer of very, very pastel green to go over, very thin layer. When it dries, right, it becomes very chalky. And then now what I do is I go back to the original color again and I sort of wash it over. And I use the white as a base to sort of absorb that new layer of color. And that itself, the white also helps to reflect the green as well. So it bounces off a bit more, so you can increase the saturation. This is a much better approach compared to actually mixing a very thick layer of the actual color itself and applying. So what I'm introducing right here is what you call luminosity. So make it luminous until it's very bright. So under dull conditions, it looks pretty attractive. But if making it attractive is not your game, then very simple. All you need to do is just scale back a bit more, mix a darker color, and then just wash over it. And then you will still get the same effect, right? So you can see the way I work with the colors is a bit like a yo-yo, right? They're going up and down, and until you get it right, until you get to the right, your desired, what do you call that, preference, right? Your desired preference, okay? A bit like Goldilocks, basically, neither too hot nor too cold, just nice. So you just cater it to your own taste. That's all. So if you can see, in terms of painting a camouflage and for painting single colored objects, we still start off with a monochromatic black and white to get the contrast. And once the contrast is established, you have a sort of a roadmap for you to sort of apply the colors. So we have the wash of the base color. You will know that, okay, maybe where the mid browns are going to go, where the shadows are going to go. And if you have buy one of these pre-mixed sets, it's very easy for you to follow, right? Rather than trying to sort of figure out which color goes into which zone. So what happens is that with this, right, immediately you can see that the zoning, right, has already been established. So maybe as a final touch from this, I'm going to sort of maybe I'm going to just define the camouflage a bit more. It's still far from completed, but at least you have a general idea of how I actually do the shading for this, right? So the next part is basically just being patient and just drawing the pattern. So to draw the pattern, basically, this is the easy part. That's where everything really comes together. All right. So I'm just going to make the squiggles around here. Just go in and then sort of look for the trademark features of the pattern. So now, let's see now, I'm going to do this. Okay, so I'm going to sort of just define this a bit more. So if you can't see this, let me know so I can adjust myself, right? Okay, so at any point this time, if you guys have any questions for me. Right? Okay, man, so I'm just going to have fun now. So this part here, I'm going to go very fast here. It's going to be just to get certain things out. It's a habit of mine. I don't like to leave things hanging. Okay, so a bit of the bright light here, a bit of bright spot here, maybe here. Right. Okay, and then I'm going to probably plant maybe a black spot in the center, right at where the shadows are. So what I'm doing right now, I'm not really copying the pattern. I'm just looking at all the trademark, the signature features, right, of the pattern. I painted this enough already, so I'm able to fake it so. Okay, all right, now about here, and then towards the sides there. So this pattern, you can see, you can also use this to this is very similar. If you want something a bit easier, then you paint the other pattern, which is the plain tree pattern. Plain tree pattern is easier. I'm going to just maybe make one hole opening right about here. Right, I think that'll be good. So what seems very messy earlier on, you can see how I sort of tighten everything up. So with the roadmap that I've established earlier, makes things a lot easier. I mean, for me, all right? So as you can see, I'm only using the number 2 brush. No, those number 2 is good enough. So edges here, down here. So getting this pattern out. Okay, so from here, yep, you can see just the final touch-up. That's it. Putting those little bits around here, and I think that's give you a very general idea. If you want to sort of highlight the green, okay, you can actually use a bit of gray, mixing it a bit of the dark black green, and then applying the same way as what I did with the light green, a bit of white there, and then just washing it over and then bring it down again. Yep. Okay. So since we've got a bit of time, so let's say for flat colors like this, okay, so let's say if you've got a big area like this, how do you go about painting it? So this part is established by Airbrush, right? So to get the field gray, since we've got a bit of paint here, so mix a bit of field gray. So I guess this is what field gray should look like, black and gray. Right. Okay, so basically it's just a bit of black, a bit of white to get the gray, and then maybe a bit of brown. I mean, field gray basically, and there's a bit of green here. So I think maybe a bit orange. So we are dealing essentially with a tertiary color. This looks pretty close. Okay. So yeah, I think this looks all right. Okay, so we have a field gray here on the top there. I'm going to make it slightly darker a bit, give it a much deeper greeny, deeper look. Okay, add some water. Okay, so some water right about here, very thin. And what I'm going to do, because we've already done a bit of the pre-toning, so I've got my color here. So this one is, I'm going to just let this stand by for a while. A bit of white about here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to sort of like strengthen the highlights right about here, right? Using the Filbert. So this is weak. So I'm going to do is I'm going to strengthen it just by putting in a tone right about here. It's too much. Okay, good. Okay, don't worry about this. So I'm sort of like I'm just reinforcing the whites. So I'm not worried too much about the brush strokes at this point in time, right? Okay. Right. So again, as you can see, as I move towards the center, I'm actually reducing the size of the area here. You can see that. So you can see that you got a broad stroke, followed by a narrower and thinner stroke. So this is white paint, you see it? So you got one layer there. We'll wait for that to dry. And this is the high point. So this is a long stroke. We're going to make another shorter stroke here. Right? Oops, this is too much. This is too wet. Okay, just wait for it to dry. Okay, so you can see, and a bit of white here. You can see that the contrast is starting to build up, right? So you got three concentric circles, 1, 2, 3, and right towards the top, that's the white. So you get the luminance coming out. One over here, and maybe another one right about here, going very light and gentle. So once you have this, wait for it to set. It's pretty quick. And then I'm going to take a bit of the field gray, dilute it with a bit of water. And I'm going to throw in the flow enhancer. Right, as I said, the flow enhancer basically makes the paint slipperier, and it's going to help me remove my tight marks. Right, so it's going to allow you to spread better. So let's see this, one stroke, and then you just need to paint this across over. All right, just one layer here. All right. So you can see it's actually very smooth. There is no, if you look around, it's not smooth, it's very smooth, it's very, very slippery. There are no bubbles, there's no watermarks because of the flow enhancer. If I use water directly, right, you'll see tide marks appearing. So this is the thing, right? So if you're going to apply, like, for example, like controlled washes over, like, let's say you mix like a raw umber color and you want to apply over the entire surface, and you do not want to have tide marks, so add a bit of flow enhancer into the paint, very little, you control, just to make it a bit more slippery, and you realize it spreads much faster and easier. And so maybe I'm going to make it something a bit darker here. Okay, I think we are good. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, we just wait for a while. Yep, so, yes.
The flow, is that from Vallejo?
Yes, it's from Vallejo. It's an airbrush. It's an airbrush flow enhancer. It's actually used for airbrushing.
But it's not diluted. Out of the bottle.
It's out from the bottle. This is actually out from the bottle. Yep.
And the matte coat will well there.
This is not matte coat. This is Tamiya flat base. Tamiya flat base, but I added a bit of water to it so that it discharges earlier, so easier. So again, you don't add too much Tamiya flat base because it will turn the paint very chalky. Yes. So this is just a bit only. That's all. Yep.
What about the Filbert Brush? What's the brand or?
Okay, Filbert Brush, right? Most good brush manufacturers will have in stock the Filbert Brush. Most. It's just a different cut. They don't know. It's just a different cut. Yeah. So you're just asking which brand of cow has the ribeye. No, all cows have ribeyes. It's just a different cut of the brush. That's it. All you need to know is that it looks like a fan. Yep. So interesting fact about the Filbert Brush is that it was developed by wildlife artists to sort of render feathers. So instead of using the chisel brush, they designed this particular brush just for the sake of rendering feathers. That's it. Then that's why you're able to get a soft stroke. That's why this brush is essentially used more for creating gradients, more than anything else. Yep. Okay. Yep. So you can see, this. I mean, this is a very for me. This is more like a graphic representation of the camouflage. So my personal taste is I would sort of like weather it down a bit more. So now I'm taking a bit of the fill gray. So with our time now, I'll take a bit of fill gray and maybe I use it to sort of highlight the dark brown portions. Sorry, the black green portions. Just a bit of a wash on top. Just very selectively. Okay, yep. So I think 12. So I think we are good. So I hope you guys have a good time. So lunch is served. It's always good to do the demo before the lunch. This way people are happy to leave. All right, thank you very much.